There's a place He comes to me. Though I'm blind, He helps me see. Though I see dimly in this place, one day I'll see Him face to face.
This is Kurt Kaikkonen, pastor of Calvary Chapel, Waterford, at your neighborhood church. Today on Face to Face, we'll be in the book of Exodus. So grab your Bibles and let's get started. If you want to hear this complete message in its entirety, go to yourneighborhoodchurch.com, where you can download Your Neighborhood Church app at the App Store. So we left Moses last week with Moses and Aaron being driven out of Egypt by the Pharaoh, along with all the people of Israel, old, young, men and women, all the children, the flocks, the herds, and they all left orderly, not in chaos, but like an army. And no one was too weak to march, and no one was left behind. And as we described last week, when they left, it was like a ghost town with all their footprints only going in one direction, into the wilderness, over 2 million people. And on every door of every house was a cross painted in lamb's blood. And so now with Israel on their journey and Egypt behind them, the Lord begins to instruct Moses and to tell Moses that all the firstborn that open the womb are his, all the animals and all the humans. And this is only fair because he just saved them all from sudden death, from the death of the firstborn that struck all of Egypt. And so when he saved them, he claimed them all the firstborn for himself. He will explain this later in the book of Numbers, what he did when he struck the Egyptians with that plague of the firstborn. And it's not because there's anything special about the firstborn within themselves, but what made them special is what the Lord did for them. So it wasn't anything about themselves that made them special. And then the Lord goes on and he reminds Moses in his instructions to stay away from leavened bread, which is bread that's made with yeast during this Passover feast and the 7 days that follow, which is called the Feast of Unleavened Bread. And that feast always begins with the Passover. And that feast is still practiced today. And it's not some joyless feast because it begins with a party on the first day and it also ends with a party on the last day. And this is where they have to get rid of all the leaven that's in their homes. And it's kind of like our New Year's resolution, where you're getting rid of all the old leaven and you're going to start this new year fresh and sinless. And these rules are going to apply in the land where they're going. And they do know where they're going. They are going to that land that was promised to their fathers, to the 12 tribes of Israel. And then it goes through all the names of the people who are currently living in that land of Canaan, the people that they're going to dispossess. And so it's kind of a good thing here for us to start getting used to these names because we're going to see this list over and over and over again. And the names are the Canaanites, the Hittites, the Amorites, the Hivites, and the Jebusites. Now, those Jebusites, they were that ancient people that actually were the residents of the city of Jerusalem. And it says that this land is flowing with milk and honey. And milk, it means that it's full of pasture lands. And then honey means it has a lot of pollination, which means there's a lot of flowering fruit trees. So this is good agriculture. And removing the leaven in their homes is very, very serious to God. And God says they're to teach it to their children because they're supposed to remember this deliverance from Israel by their God forever. And so it says there in verse 9 that they are to keep it, as it says, as a sign to you on your hand and as a memorial between your eyes, that the Lord's law will be in your mouth. And what this is supposed to mean by saying in your hand, it means, well, it's in your hand. You're supposed to do them. You're supposed to do these works. And between your eyes means you're supposed to think about these things. So you're not supposed to forget about your deliverance. And if you've ever seen the Orthodox Jews, you know, the ones with the long beards and the little hats and they kind of look like the Amish people, or if you've seen like the Hasidic Jews with the long robes and the long beards with the shrouds over their head, or those ones with those fur hats that look like those Russian kind of hats, like the kind of came from like a James Bond movie, you can see them all trying to take this passage literally, where they have these little boxes that are called phylacteries. And inside of those phylacteries and those little boxes are these little tiny scrolls. And what's copied on those little scrolls that they put inside of these phylactery boxes are 4 passages. The passages are Exodus 13, 1 through 10, and Exodus 11 through 16, which is exactly the passages that we're reading here today. And then on the other scrolls, they have Deuteronomy 6, 4 through 9, and Deuteronomy 11, 13 through 21. And then you'll see them, they'll strap these on their forehead, and they'll strap them on their hands with this leather straps. But if it was God's intention for them to fill this passage physically, or to do it literally in this way with these boxes, well, then they probably should have made one for their mouths, because it also says that the law may be in your mouth. So you can see here, this passage was never intended to be carried out literally as a physical sign. And then God is saying that when they get settled in this land of Canaan, that every firstborn animal is going to belong to him. So if that's a lamb or a goat or an ox or a clean animal that's used for sacrifice, they're to dedicate that to the Lord for sacrifice. But if it's an unclean animal, like a donkey, an animal that's not used for sacrifice, you're supposed to substitute a clean animal in its place of your lambs, if you want to keep that donkey. So if you find that having a donkey is more valuable to you than having a lamb, then you offer a lamb to keep your donkey. But if you find that that lamb is more valuable to you, then you have to kill that firstborn donkey by breaking its neck. All the other donkeys after that you can keep. But this only applies to the animals. You have to redeem your children. You're not allowed to kill them, so you have to redeem all your firstborn sons with a sacrifice. But unclean animals and human beings are never to be sacrificed to God. And then we're going to see later that God is going to substitute all the firstborn sons that were saved from Egypt, and they're going to exchange them for all the men of the tribe of Levi, where the men in that family will be set apart as a tribe of priests to God. And the whole reason for this law of redemption was instituted for Israel. It wasn't because the Lord had any pleasure in any of the death of these animals, but it was so that every time when an animal was sacrificed, the children of Israel would know how much their God loved them and how much that he was willing to do for them to save them. Because there was going to always be a discussion going on. That's like it says in verse 14, where it says this discussion, it would be all year long. And it says, when your son asks you in time to come, saying, what is this? You shall say to him, by strength of the hand of the Lord brought us out of Egypt, out of the house of bondage. So they would always be reminded. This was never to be forgotten. And this was supposed to be discussed pretty much every day of their life. So this story was to be told over and over and over again, because what God did for Israel was so great, and it's all because of his great love for them. And he wants them to know this love, and he never wants them to forget it. And we saw this redemption put into practice in the New Testament when Mary and Joseph, they brought their sacrifice and they offered in the temple when Jesus was born. And then after God had given all these instructions to Moses, we learned that when the people left Egypt, God wasn't going to lead them by the short route. And that short route would have been called the Way of the Sea, which is called the Via Maris, which was the common trade route. And if they did go that way, it was only 110 miles, and it would have only taken them about 11 days. But the reason he didn't take them is because this land was still under the control of Egypt, where the Egyptians, they would have had military outposts all along this whole way. And so we're told the reason why God didn't take them by this route, and it was because God didn't want his people to be in fear of war. And even though there was over 2 million Jews here, they weren't warriors. They were slaves. They would never be able to stand a battle against the Egyptians. They would have just been slaughtered. And beside all that, they didn't have any weapons. All they were carrying were things like food and things for their survival, like their tents and their pots to cook in and their cooking utensils. And then at the first sight of any fighting, they would have wanted to return to Egypt. So even though the Viomaras, that they would have had these easy roads and they would have had plenty of food and water along the way, they couldn't see the dangers, but God could see them. And he didn't want to throw those Hebrews into any kind of situations that they're not prepared for. He didn't want to overwhelm them. So God takes them into the wilderness by the Red Sea. What God is going to do, he's going to take time to teach them and to train them, because eventually these people will be great warriors. But being slaves, there's a lot they don't know. And though it only took one night to take the people out of Egypt, it will take God 40 years to take Egypt out of the people. And this is exactly the same way that God lovingly treats us when we come to Christ, when we become his child, where you have just come out of the world and you're saved. When you come out, you have the world's ideas and you have the world's ways, the way the world thinks, and it's been there your whole life. Where now, even though you know God, you're not totally changed in one day. And it takes time for the Lord to take the world out of you. He takes the time to teach you and to train you. And he always does this in a very loving and gentle way, because like them, he doesn't want you to become afraid and to return to the world. So you're saved in one moment, in just one day, and then he leads us through these many experiences where he teaches us how to know him better, and it's making us like himself and taking the world out of us. So God here, he has planned the best way for Israel, though no one would ever understand why he had chosen that way, and probably nobody would have agreed with him that this made sense. At least no military strategist would. And you kind of wonder, because Moses, he was a former military strategist, so he may have even had a little bit of trouble with it, but we don't read that here. But before they leave, Moses goes up and he picks up Joseph's coffin, and you can read about that back in Genesis 50. And in Genesis 50, you'll read that Joseph's coffin, it was never buried. So his coffin had been laying above ground for about 400 years, because Joseph had made the children of Israel promise to take him with them when they returned to the land of Canaan, because he knew that God had promised that. So Joseph here, he will be the only one of the 12 brothers of the 12 sons of Jacob who will be buried in the land of Canaan. All the other 11 brothers, the other heads of the tribes, they're all buried somewhere in Egypt. And this is the same Joseph that not only saved the Hebrews, but Joseph here, he also saved all these Egyptians when they had this world famine. And so you have these 2 million people, and none of them would have been standing there unless God had done this work through Joseph's life. And his body would have been perfectly preserved. He would have been like any other Egyptian mummy. You've been listening to Face to Face. Face to Face on this radio station has been provided by Your Neighborhood Church. If you want to help support Face to Face and put this program on other stations just like yours, you can contact us at yourneighborhoodchurch.com or write Your Neighborhood Church, P.O. Box 500, Romeo, Michigan 48065.
There's a place he comes to me. Though I'm blind, he helps me see. Though I see dimly in this place, one day I'll see him face to face.
Tune in again tomorrow at this same time as we continue to go through the Bible.